The dry season had carved its mark deep into the heart of Ngala Forest, leaving behind cracked riverbeds, fallen trees, and a silence so heavy it felt like the world was holding its breath. Days without rain had turned the rainforest, normally lush, loud, and overflowing with life, into a maze of dust-coated leaves and brittle branches. Even the cicadas, those tireless voices of the tropics, sang less now, as if they too were conserving the little energy they had left. Through this muted world moved a shadow, not the kind cast by the sun, but a living one. A black panther, her coat dark as midnight oil and her ribs showing through her sleek frame, padded silently over the dry earth. Shadow, as the researchers called her, had survived countless storms, rival predators, and human encroachment. She was known across Ngala as one of its most gifted hunters, a creature sculpted by evolution for grace, power, and lethal precision. But the forest didn't care about reputations, and hunger didn't respect legends. Shadow had not eaten in 8 days. Her body, once fluid and confident, now moved with a stiffness born from exhaustion. Every step cost her. Every breath carried the dry taste of desperation. She paused beneath a leaning tree trunk, ears twitching at the faint rustle of dead leaves behind her, just the wind. The prey animals had vanished into deeper pockets of the forest, migrating toward distant water sources she no longer had the strength to reach. Above her, a quiet drone hummed through the canopy. It carried a small camera, part of a long-running conservation program overseen by a rotating team of wildlife researchers. To most people, it was just a speck of metal in the African sky. But to the scientists at the Ngala Field Station, it was an invaluable window into the fragile ecosystem they were fighting to protect. At the station's small monitoring room, a blinking red dot slowly crawled across a digital map. That dot was Shadow, and the woman observing it, sipping coffee gone cold hours ago, was Dr. Emily Brooks, a wildlife veterinarian from Seattle who had traded the comfort of urban life for the relentless humidity and unpredictable challenges of the Cameroonian rainforest. She leaned closer, studying Shadow's movement pattern with growing concern. The panther's pace had slowed drastically in recent days. She was stopping for long stretches at odd hours, resting more than a healthy cat ever would. Emily knew what it meant. Shadow was close to collapse. And as much as Emily wanted to intervene, to bring food, to help in the way her instincts as a healer demanded, she couldn't. Field protocol was strict. No interference with predator-prey dynamics. Nature had to run its course, even when nature was cruel. Emily rubbed her forehead, feeling the familiar ache of helplessness. "Come on, girl. Just hold on a little longer." Back in the forest, Shadow continued her slow, painful walk through a dry patch of undergrowth. The sun hung low behind her, staining the skies orange and copper, casting long shadows that stretched like thin fingers across the ground. She paused again, panting softly, her sides rising and falling with uneven rhythm. She could smell the faint echo of life on the wind, something vulnerable, something close, but she didn't have the strength yet to pursue it. She lowered herself onto the cool earth, closing her amber eyes for a moment. The forest exhaled around her, rustling with a sound almost like a reluctant sympathy. In that fragile stillness, a narrator might have said that fate was watching closely, preparing to intervene. For those watching this story, whether on a screen or simply listening from the quiet of their living rooms, this would be the moment to settle in, to breathe with the rhythm of the forest itself. And if they found themselves drawn to tales like this, raw stories of survival, compassion, and the surprising tenderness hidden even within predators. This would be the gentle moment to say, before we go deeper, consider subscribing to Whispering Hearts. It helps this channel continue sharing real stories from the wild, stories that remind us we're all connected, no matter how vast the forest or how small our place in it. Thank you. Shadow lifted her head again as the last light of day slipped behind the horizon. Her stomach clenched, her muscles trembled. Hunger gnawed at her like a second skeleton. She had lived through many lean seasons, but never one like this. If she didn't find food soon, she would be too weak to hunt at all. Then, just as she took another step forward, a faint scent drifted toward her, sharp, metallic, tinged with decay. Blood, fresh enough to follow. Shadow's eyes focused, her instincts sharpened like a blade dragged over a stone. Her legs found just enough strength to move, to track the scent threading through the dying forest. She didn't know yet, and neither did the watchers above, but what she was about to find was not prey. It was a story that would defy every rule she'd ever lived by, and it would begin with a single, fragile heartbeat waiting for her in the dark.
At the Ngala field station, morning always arrived with a mixture of hope and dread. The forest woke slowly, monkeys calling from distant branches, insects stitching the air with their familiar whine, but the people working inside the small concrete and tin building knew better than to confuse sound with safety. Life was fragile here, especially during a drought like this one, and no one felt that truth more deeply than Dr. Emily Brooks, who stood over the glowing screen of the tracking monitor, staring at a single red dot that moved far too slowly. Shadow, the strongest female panther they had ever documented. A hunter who once dominated this forest was now barely covering a mile in half a day. Emily leaned in, her brows pulling tight. She had seen ill predators before, injuries, disease, old age, and yet there was something else here, something heavier. Something like resignation. It made her chest tighten. Behind her, the door swung open with a warm gust of humid air. "You're here early again," Jonas said, stepping inside with a bundle of fresh SD cards from the trail cameras. Jonas was tall, quiet, and carried the calm presence of someone born into the rhythm of the forest. "Shadow's still on your mind." "She hasn't eaten," Emily murmured, tapping the screen. 8 days, Jonas. Maybe more. Look at this pattern, these long pauses. Jonas nodded, setting the cards on the table. A hungry cat is dangerous, a starving one is worse. Emily swallowed. She's more than dangerous, she's important. Losing her would mean losing half the balance in this part of Ngala. Before Jonas could answer, another voice entered, sharp, efficient, and echoing faintly with authority. Dr. Asha Patel, the lead coordinator for the region's conservation efforts, stepped in carrying a tablet loaded with reports. Patel rarely raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone demanded attention. "You're both up early again," Patel remarked, glancing between them before her eyes landed on the red dot on the map. "Shadow again." Emily straightened. Her movement has slowed. She's stopping more often. "If this continues," Patel lifted a hand. "I know what you're thinking. But we've gone over this. We do not intervene unless absolutely necessary. Predators can't become dependent on human help." Emily bit her tongue. She understood policy, she understood funding, scientific credibility, the delicate politics of conservation, but she also understood suffering. And Shadow's decline wasn't theoretical. It was real, raw, and getting worse. Jonas broke silence first. "Emily is right to worry. The drought is hitting everything. The antelope herds are moving north. Even the duckers are scarce. And we're losing more ground to the moose poaching ring," Patel added with a tired sigh. 3 new snares found this week, 2 injured buffalo, 1 dead gorilla. Emily looked away from the screen. The mention of snares always made her stomach turn. She'd treated animals ripped open with steel wire. Some lived, many didn't. Shadow herself had once been photographed dragging an old snare on her hind leg years ago, before Emily ever arrived. Jonas was part of the team that found her then, saved her. That panther had fought too hard to survive only to starve now. "Let me check the waterway region," Emily said suddenly. "If she's going there again, maybe—" Patel cut her off, voice calm but firm. "Emily, no." Then more gently, "You do good work, but we must respect natural order." Emily nodded, though frustration simmered beneath her composure. Natural order, a phrase that always sounded noble on paper, but cruel when spoken over a creature slowly dying. Jonas slid one of the SD cards into the reader, pulling up footage from a camera trap. For a moment, all they saw was flickering leaves and dust drifting through weak sunlight. But then, Shadow appeared. Her silhouette glided into frame, but she was thinner than before, her shoulders sharp, her walk uneven. She paused, sniffed at the air, and then continued out of view. Emily felt her throat tighten. She's wasting away. Jonas exhaled heavily. She needs prey, or luck, or both. Patel closed her tablet. "We'll keep monitoring, but unless she's injured beyond functioning—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. They all knew what "unless" meant. Emily returned her gaze to the map. The red dot was moving again, but slowly, like someone forcing herself forward through thick mud. As she watched, she felt something shift, not in the data, but inside her. A prick of intuition, a whisper of warning. "Something's wrong," she murmured. "This isn't just hunger. Something else is pulling her off course." Jonas stepped closer. "You think she's injured?" "I don't know, but I know her patterns. This isn't normal." Patel approached the screen, studying the readings. Shadow's heart rate, a subtle pulse monitored through her colliery, was uneven. Not dangerously low, but unsteady. Not what they were used to seeing. Patel pressed her lips together. "If you're right, we may have a problem." Emily met her gaze. For once, Patel didn't look entirely certain. A moment later, the red dot flickered, hesitated, and then shifted suddenly, veering towards an area marked on the map as Hollow Ridge, a place known for two things: dangerously unstable ground and abandoned poaching sites. Emily inhaled sharply. Why would she go there? Jonas shook his head. "There's nothing left to hunt." "Unless she smelled something," Emily whispered. "Or someone." The three of them stood in the dim room, the hum of the generator filling the silence. The red dot kept moving, slow but deliberate, towards a stretch of forest where no animal in its right mind wandered during a drought, unless it was following the scent of blood. Emily's chest tightened. Whatever Shadow was tracking out there, it wouldn't be ordinary. And Emily had no idea that this choice, simply watching a red dot move, was the first step into a story she would never forget.
Shadow moved like a ghost through the brittle underbrush, her body low, her breath shallow, every step a negotiation with exhaustion. Yet the scent she followed pulled her forward with a force stronger than hunger itself. It was the unmistakable mix of blood, fear, and fresh death, but threaded with something else, something softer, faint like warm milk left too long in the sun. It made her whiskers twitch, her pupils widen. Whatever lay ahead wasn't just a carcass, it was something alive, something fragile. The forest changed as she approached Hollow Ridge. The trees grew crooked, their trunks scarred from old fires. Patches of bare dirt revealed long drag marks, signs of people who moved quietly but carried violence with them. Shadow slowed instinctively. Big cats feared little in the wild, but the scent of humans, especially men who reeked of gunpowder and sweat, made even the fiercest predators wary. Her paws padded across a shaded clearing when the smell hit her full force. Overwhelming, metallic, wrong. She froze. Ahead, partly hidden behind a fallen tree, lay a still body. A bushbook doe, legs splayed, eyes already glazed. Her throat bore a deep cut from a snare, the kind Moose's poaching crew favored, simple, silent, merciless. The wire glinted in the dirt nearby, smeared with dried blood. Shadow approached carefully,
her ribs visible with every breath. Dead prey wasn't what she preferred. She had always relied on speed and instinct, not scavenging. But starvation had a way of bending even the proudest hunter's rules. She lowered her head toward the doe's flank, ready to claim the meal before flies made it unbearable. But then she heard it. A trembling, broken whimper. So small, it could have been mistaken for the buzz of an insect. Shadow lifted her head, listened. There it was again. She circled the doe's body, muscles tightening with anticipation, expecting perhaps a half-dead scavenger or a wounded predator too weak to hide. But instead, she found him. A tiny bushbook calf, barely standing, pressed against her mother's belly, as if trying to melt into her body that could no longer move. His legs were so thin she could see daylight between the bones. His coat still held the soft, velvety fuzz of newborn life. His eyes, big, black, shimmering, lifted toward Shadow. He didn't run. He didn't even try. He simply stared at her, chest rising too fast, breath quivering like a candle in a draft. Shadow stiffened. The scent of the calf was intoxicating in a cruel, biological way. Sweet, warm, harmless, the perfect prey. Her jaws parted slightly, revealing sharp canines meant for one clean bite. Just one. One bite and her agony would ease. One bite and the trembling in her legs might finally stop. She stepped closer. The calf wobbled, but didn't retreat. Instead, with a motion so innocent it startled her, he reached his small head toward her chest, burying his face against her dark fur as if searching for his mother's heartbeat. The world seemed to still. Shadow felt something old stir beneath her ribs, something she had buried since the day her own cubs were taken by the storm-swollen river seasons ago. She remembered their tiny mews, the way they pressed against her just like this. She remembered the helpless circles she ran along the riverbank as the waters swallowed them. She remembered the grief that had hollowed her out for months afterward. She should have snapped the calf's neck by now. Nature demanded it. Hunger demanded it. Instead, her jaws closed without biting. Her breath shook. The calf pressed closer, hoping that she was safety, not death. Shadow's tail flicked once, uncertain. She lowered her muzzle, and instead of sinking her teeth into his throat, she touched her nose gently to the top of his head. He smelled of milk, mud, and fear. But beneath that, beneath everything, he smelled like a child. A soft sound escaped him, a weak little cry that cut straight through her instinct like sunlight through fog. Shadow let out a slow exhale, her body lowering just enough that the calf leaned into her warmth. Somewhere far above, one of Emily's remote cameras blinked, recording the moment without anyone yet knowing what it meant. Shadow began to groom him. A single careful lick at first, then another. She cleaned the dust from his ears, the dried mud from his cheek, the grass seeds clinging to his fragile neck. As she worked, the calf's breathing softened. He sagged against her, overwhelmed with exhaustion and hope mingled into one trembling bundle. A breeze swept through the clearing, stirring dead leaves around them. And in that lonely place, where snares had claimed a mother and hunger should have claimed a child, something inexplicable happened, something neither nature nor instinct could fully explain. Shadow curled her body protectively around the tiny calf, shielding him from the cooling air. The forest watched in silence, unsure whether to call it a mistake or a miracle. As the last traces of daylight sank behind the trees, Shadow lifted her head toward the horizon. Hunger still gnawed at her ribs, but now another force pulled at her even harder. She had found a life too young to die, and against every rule written into her blood, she was not going to let him go.
Night arrived in the forest with a heavy, breathless silence, as though Ngala itself was bracing for what was to come. The clouds rolled in slowly at first, a low hum of distant thunder pulsing through the treetops. Shadow lifted her head, nostrils flaring as she sensed the shift in the air, cooler, thicker, charged with the promise of rain. A coming storm could be a mercy or a curse. Tonight, it would be both. The tiny calf pressed closer to her, trembling not from fear alone, but from the creeping chill that settled in once the sun slipped away. He was far too young, too fragile, too exposed. A newborn antelope didn't stand a chance in night air like this, not without a mother's warmth. The doe lying nearby had run out of warmth hours ago. Shadow nudged the calf gently with her nose, guiding him toward a hollow beneath a fallen trunk. It wasn't much, but it was shelter against the worst of the wind. She curled her body around him, the soft rise and fall of his breath brushing against her ribs. He made a faint, weak bleat, calling for a mother who would never respond. The sound cut through her like a thorn. It was the exact pitch her own cubs had once made. Her throat tightened, her eyes narrowed at the memory, two small bodies swept away in a flood, her frantic leaps into raging water, the empty days afterward when she wandered without direction or purpose. For months, she had avoided the part of the forest where the river had claimed them. For months, she had chosen to hunt at night to avoid the scent of other mothers tending their young. She had sworn never to feel that kind of loss again. Yet here she was, warming a newborn that wasn't hers, knowing exactly what fate awaited him. A panther had no reason to protect an antelope calf, but a mother was different. A gust of cold wind blew across the clearing, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of humans, motor oil, smoke, sweat. Shadow tensed, her ears swiveled toward the tree line. Voices. Two men speaking in low tones. Musa's men, no doubt, circling back to check their snares. Shadow stayed perfectly still except for the subtle tightening of her muscles. The calf sensed her fear and froze, his tiny frame rigid against her stomach. A flashlight beam pierced through the trees, trembling slightly as the man holding it stepped closer to the clearing. Shadow's claws slid silently from their sheaths. If he came too close, if he reached for the calf, she would... Her pulse hammered. The beam drifted over the corpse of the doe, over the dirt, over broken branches, each second stretching thin like wire. Then, a distant gunshot cracked through the forest. The men cursed, turning toward the sound. "Another buffalo, maybe," one shouted. They hurried away, boots crunching over twigs and leaves. Shadow waited long after the voices faded, her heart still racing. Only when the forest fell quiet again did she relax her grip on the calf. He sagged into her warmth, exhausted by a danger he couldn't comprehend. Lightning cracked across the sky. A second later, the storm hit, hard. Rain hammered the forest floor, soaking the dry earth within moments, flooding shallow grooves in the ground. Water cascaded off broad leaves, drumming like 1,000 soft fists. The hollow under the trunk was barely enough. Rain sprayed through gaps, chilling the calf until he began to shake violently. Shadow pulled him closer, wrapping her body around him as tightly as she could. She licked his head, his ears, his neck, quick strokes meant to warm, clean, and comfort. Shadow quieted, slowly, carefully, as if placing all trust in her. Shadow rested her chin on his fragile back. Her hunger still gnawed at her with a relentless ache,
twisting her stomach into knots. She could hear the doe's body behind them, heavy and motionless, full of meat she desperately needed. Yet the thought of leaving the calf alone, even for a few minutes, made her eyes burn with a fierce, inexplicable fear. The calf stirred weakly, his breath puffed against her fur in tiny, uneven bursts. He was cold, too cold. He needed milk, warmth, and constant care, things she couldn't provide, things she had no business trying to give. Shadow closed her eyes against the rain dripping through the trunk. She should walk away. She knew she should. But when she opened her eyes, the calf had nestled deeper against her chest, his head tucked beneath her foreleg as though she belonged to him. A low, involuntary rumble rose in Shadow's throat, not a growl, something softer, protective. Her tail curled around him. She lowered her head, covering him from the storm. In that moment, something shifted between them. A silent agreement, a fragile bond forged not by logic or instinct, but by two lives abandoned at the same place, same hour, for different reasons. Shadow had spent her life as a hunter, a creature of the night and of survival. But tonight, beneath the storm's roar, in the shelter of a fallen tree, she became something else entirely. She became the warmth that stood between a newborn and death. She became the heartbeat that steadied his trembling. She became, once again, a mother. And when dawn finally arrived, bringing weak gold light to the dripping forest, Shadow rose slowly, stiffly, and lifted the calf by the scruff with a tenderness no one would ever believe unless they saw it with their own eyes. She carried him away from the clearing, away from the snares, away from the scent of blood and sorrow, toward some place safer, if such a place existed anymore, toward a choice she did not yet understand she was making. Morning came slowly, wrapped in a pale, exhausted light that filtered through the drenched canopy. The storm had washed the forest clean, leaving behind the sharp scent of wet bark and overturned soil. But for Shadow, the morning carried no sense of renewal, only the weight of a decision she had made without meaning to. The tiny calf, still weak, still trembling, lay curled beneath her chin. His breathing was shallow but steady, his body warmer now after hours pressed against her. He blinked up at the dim sky as if expecting his mother's shape to appear between the leaves. Instead, all he saw was Shadow's dark silhouette, her broad shoulders forming a shield between him and the world. Shadow lifted him gently by the scruff. His small legs dangled helplessly, but he did not cry or resist. He had already accepted her the way the very young do, completely, blindly, as though the universe had never offered him another choice. But Shadow understood the forest far better than he ever could. She knew staying in this place meant death. The clearing where the doe had died reeked of blood and human scent, too visible, too dangerous, too mournful. Predators would smell the carcass, scavengers would circle. Worse, Moose's men might return to check their snares, hunting for whatever had escaped their wire. Shadow took one last look at the lifeless mother lying in the mud. The snare still gleamed beside her, cruel and silent. The storm had washed away the worst of the blood, but not the tragedy of it. For a moment, Shadow's tail lashed in anger, a rare, violent motion from an animal usually composed, even under pressure. She could smell the fear soaked into the doe's fur, the agony that had lingered long after the wire cut deep. Then she turned away. She carried the calf toward the deeper forest, where the terrain grew steeper, wetter, and wilder. toward a broken ridge that led to an old memory she had never expected to revisit. The forest floor was slick, patches of mud rising almost to her ankles. The calf dangled from her jaws, light as a leaf, but the journey itself was punishing. Shadow's limbs shook with every climb, every jump across fallen branches. Her hunger gnawed harder than ever now that she'd gone another night without food, but she couldn't hunt, not while carrying him, not while every ounce of her dwindling strength was needed simply to move. Still, she pressed on. The valley she sought wasn't far, but reaching it required crossing a narrow gully where rainwater still rushed in frothy currents. Shadow set the calf down at the edge and tested the soil with her paw. It crumbled instantly. The gully was shallow, but slippery, too slippery for him to cross alone. She grabbed him again and stepped into the water, muscles locking as the cold current splashed against her stomach. She braced her claws into the opposite bank, hauling herself upward with a grunt that tore from her throat. For one terrifying second, her paw slipped. The calf swung beneath her chin, his tiny hooves scraping the air above the rushing water. Shadow snarled, not in anger, but in the strained, desperate cry of a mother terrified of losing someone. She lunged again, this time anchoring herself on a root that jutted from the slope. With one last heave, she dragged them both onto solid ground. She stood there panting, rainwater dripping from her whiskers, her entire body trembling under the dual weight of fatigue and instinct. The calf let out a soft, pitiful sound, half fear, half gratitude. Shadow nuzzled him briefly before continuing on. Hours passed. Forest sounds swelled around them. Frog croaks, bird calls, the faint rustle of monkeys returning to their canopy roots. But there were other sounds too. The distant pad of a hyena, the hollow hoot of a vulture circling somewhere overhead. Sprout, though he had no name yet, would not survive a single minute in this place. And Shadow wasn't sure how long she herself could last without food. Just as her legs began to wobble dangerously, the trees parted into a small, hidden valley, the one she had remembered from her own painful past. Years ago, before the flood, she had brought her cubs here. It had been a sanctuary then, damp but safe, with a narrow spring trickling from a crack in the rock and patches of soft grass growing even in the harshest seasons. Now the spring still flowed. Shadow set the calf down, letting him tiptoe toward the trickling water. He lapped clumsily, splashing more than he drank, but within minutes the improvement showed. His breathing steadied, his ears perked up. He tried nibbling at a blade of grass, only to recoil with confusion. His body wanted milk, not vegetation. He bleated softly, the sound hoarse but pleading. Shadow lowered herself beside him, touching his flank with the broad side of her face. Hunger clawed through her belly with renewed cruelty at the reminder that she had nothing to give him. No milk, no food, nothing except warmth and protection. Yet the calf curled against her as if she were the only mother he had ever known. And maybe, in some impossible way, she was. As the valley settled into late afternoon calm, Shadow scanned the edges with a mother's vigilance. She knew predators rarely crossed into this narrow bowl of earth, but nothing in the forest was guaranteed anymore. And she still smelled faint traces of humans, faint but real. Moose's men had been here recently, and they might return. Shadow rested her head next to the calf, her breath warming his tiny spine. She didn't sleep, predators seldom slept deeply, but she allowed herself a sliver of peace she hadn't felt in days. For the moment, they were safe, alive, together. But the forest was not done testing them.
and neither hunger nor fate had shown their sharpest teeth yet.
The afternoon heat clung to the Ngala field station like a thick wool blanket. Ceiling fans hummed overhead, moving the heavy air just enough to make breathing easier, but not enough to cool anyone. In the monitoring room, Dr. Emily Brooks stared at the screen with growing alarm. Shadow's GPS marker, normally a smooth trail of decisive movement, now crawled in hesitant, irregular clusters, pauses longer than any panther would ever choose on her own. Every few minutes, the red dot blinked where she'd stopped again. Emily could almost imagine Shadow lowering herself to the ground, sides heaving, fighting against exhaustion she didn't yet understand had a deeper cause. Emily leaned in, zooming closer on the map. The valley Shadow had entered was remote, a pocket of land surrounded by ridges on all sides. It shouldn't have been a place she lingered, not unless she had a kill or something else to keep her anchored there. Jonas entered quietly, shutting the door behind him with the caution of someone who'd learned to move softly even outside the forest. He carried 2 tin mugs of coffee, one of which he placed beside Emily. "You've been staring at that screen for 2 hours," he said gently. "I don't like her pattern. She's not hunting. She's not resting normally. She's pacing, or something like pacing." Jonas crossed his arms, studying the zigzagging trail. "Hunger can make a predator move strangely." "This isn't strange," Emily murmured. "This is wrong." Before Jonas could answer, the door swung open again. Dr. Asha Patel stepped inside, her expression already set in a firm line. She didn't need to ask what they were looking at. She'd been watching Shadow's data all morning. "Is there any sign of injury?" Patel asked, her voice cool but not unkind. Emily tapped the heart rate indicator. "Her vitals are unstable, not dangerous but stressed, and she's stopping too often. Even a starving cat should still be moving with purpose." "Starving is purpose," Patel countered. "She's conserving energy." Emily shook her head. "No. That valley she's in, Shadow never hunts there. I've checked her past logs. She avoids it." Jonas frowned slightly. "Avoids or avoided?" Emily paused. "You think she found something?" Jonas shrugged. "Could be, but whatever it is, it holds her attention." Emily zoomed in again, staring at the cluster of red dots. "Whatever she found, she's staying with it. That's not normal for her." Patel stepped closer, arms folded. "I understand the concern, but unless we have proof of injury or entanglement, we can't interfere." Emily exhaled sharply. "Asha, you know as well as I do that her survival is important, not just emotionally, ecologically. If the dominant female in this region collapses, then a younger cat will fill her territory," Patel said. "It's nature's system." Emily turned toward her, frustration flickering across her face. "Nature's system is already being destroyed, not by predators, by snares, by poachers, by drought. She's not dying because of natural selection. She's dying because humans ruined her ecosystem." The room fell quiet. Jonas watched the exchange with careful eyes. Patel's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "That may be true, but we can't cross the line into managing the lives of predators. Our credibility depends on honoring that boundary. One intervention leads to another, and soon we're raising wildlife by hand." Emily looked back at the screen, her voice lower but unwavering. "This isn't about raising her, it's about saving her." Jonas placed a card reader into the console and loaded the newest trail camera footage. The screen flickered, then resolved into grainy nighttime footage. A shape appeared. Shadow, thinner than ever, walking stiffly. But something else caught Emily's attention, a faint movement at the bottom of the frame, a tiny shape leaning into her side. Emily's breath hitched. "Wait, pause that!" Jonas froze the frame. Emily leaned so close to the monitor, her glasses nearly touched it. The image was small, blurry, barely legible, but the shape was unmistakable. A small body, 4 thin legs, a trembling silhouette pressed against Shadow's flank. Emily whispered, "That's not prey, that's alive." Patel blinked, stunned. "It could be another predator's cub?" "No," Emily said immediately. "Look at the posture, the body shape, the size. It's an antelope calf." Jonas exhaled a long, low breath. Shadow found a baby. Patel stepped closer, her expression shifting from skepticism to disbelief. Why would she stay near prey that small without killing it? Emily answered softly, "Because she hasn't eaten in days. If she wanted it dead, it would have already been dead." They watched the footage again, this time in silence. Shadow bent her head, not to bite, but to nudge the calf gently into her chest. The calf leaned into her, trusting as though he'd never known another mother. Patel pressed her lips together. "This goes against everything we know." Jonas shook his head in awe. "In my village, the elders say sometimes the forest chooses a mercy that even animals don't understand. Maybe this is one of those times." Emily didn't speak. Her throat tightened with something like awe, grief, and fear intertwined. Here was the proof she needed, proof that Shadow wasn't simply slowing down. She was caring for something helpless. And caring was dangerous. It meant she wasn't hunting. It meant she was starving herself even more. Emily stared at the screen. Her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "I'm going out there." Patel's head snapped toward her. "Absolutely not, Emily, no. Shadow has a newborn with her. He's dehydrated, he's starving, and she can't feed him. They're both going to die if someone doesn't intervene." "This is not our role," Patel said firmly. "We observe. We do not interfere. The calf is prey, the panther is predator. What you're suggesting breaks every protocol we have, including international guidelines." Emily swallowed hard, then changed the guidelines. Patel shook her head. "That's not how this works." Emily didn't answer. She only stared at the frozen image of Shadow and the calf, 2 lives clinging to each other in a dying forest. Jonas placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but uncertain. "If you go out there," he said softly, "you won't be the same scientist when you come back." Emily nodded slowly. "I know." "And Shadow," asked Jonas, "will she trust you or see you as a threat?" Emily didn't look away from the screen. "That," she said quietly, "is a risk I'm willing to take." Because the truth was simple, ancient, and heavy as the forest itself. Some rules protected ecosystems, and some rules protected consciences. Tonight, Emily would have to choose which one she could live without. Night settled over Ngala like a velvet curtain, soft but laden with danger. The moon climbed slowly through the branches, silvering the wet leaves left behind by yesterday's storm. For most of the forest, evening was a time to hunt, to hide, or to try to sleep through the chorus of nocturnal voices. But for Shadow, the night had become something else entirely. It had become the hour she fought hardest to keep a fragile life breathing. The tiny calf, still nameless, still trembling, lay tucked beneath her foreleg, his small ribs lifting and falling too quickly. His thirst had eased a little thanks to the spring water, but hunger was tightening around him like a fist. He nudged her belly again and again, searching, pleading for milk she simply could not give. Each futile attempt tore at Shadow in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. She rose to her feet, pacing a small circle in the narrow valley. Her body was shaking now, not from cold, but from weakness. Her stomach pulled tight with cramps as she listened to the calf's soft, despairing cries. A newborn antelope couldn't live on water alone. Without milk, he would fade before dawn. Shadow lowered her head, licking his ears, trying to soothe him with warmth and touch. But comfort wasn't enough. Not tonight. Above the valley, hidden beneath a thick canopy of leaves, the faint buzz of a drone drifted between the trees. Noah, the young French technician with a habit of humming to himself when he was nervous, guided the drone in slow, careful sweeps. He watched the small monitor mounted onto his chest harness, brow furrowed. "Come on, Shadow," Noah whispered to the screen. "Show me where you are." Emily crouched beside him, binoculars dangling around her neck, her breath visible in the cool night air. Jonas stood slightly behind them, keeping watch for both animals and humans. Neither of them had told Dr. Patel they were out here, and neither cared. Emily's palms sweated despite the chill. She had brought with her a shallow bowl, a sealed container of antelope milk formula, and a long-handled spoon. Everything she carried felt heavier than it should, because she knew the line she was crossing tonight might jeopardize her career, her reputation, and possibly even Shadow's trust. Jonas's whisper broke the silence. "There, in the valley." Noah angled the drone lower. The tiny screen flickered and then lit up with moving shapes. The dark, unmistakable silhouette of Shadow pacing like a restless mother, and at her paws the tiny calf tipping weakly from side to side. Emily's heart clenched. "He's getting worse." Jonas nodded grimly. "Too small, too hungry. He won't last the night without help." A soft breeze rolled through the valley and brushed Shadow's coat. She lifted her head sharply, sensing something foreign. Human scent. Faint, but real. Her muscles tensed. She pressed the calf beneath her, shielding him beneath her chest as she scanned the ridge with sharp, wary eyes. Emily froze. "She knows we're here." "Of course she does," Jonas whispered. "A mother always knows when something comes near her child." Emily steadied her breathing. She stepped forward slowly, stopping just at the ridgeline, far enough to respect Shadow's boundary, close enough to be seen. She crouched low, her posture non-threatening, and placed the small bowl onto the mossy ground. No sudden movements, no eye contact, just presence. She poured the formula into the bowl, the thick white liquid releasing a faint, sweet scent. Then she retreated, backing away step by step until she stood beside Jonas again. Shadow watched everything. Her eyes glowed gold in the moonlight, suspicious, calculating, protective. Minutes passed. Long, tense minutes. The calf whimpered beneath her. Shadow's ears flicked toward him. His hunger was too loud, too raw. She nudged him, then stared again at the strange white dish that had appeared near the rocks. Jonas whispered, "Will she understand?" Emily didn't blink. "I don't know, but I have to believe she will." Another minute passed. Another. Finally, Shadow stood, slowly, carefully. She stepped over the calf and approached the bowl in a crouch as though stalking an invisible threat. She sniffed the air, once, twice, a long, thoughtful inhale. Her whiskers trembled, her tail flicked. Then, astonishingly, she leaned down and tasted the milk. Emily clasped her hands over her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. "Come on, girl, come on." Shadow paused after the first lick, processing the strange new flavor. Thick, warm, familiar in a way she could not explain. Milk was milk no matter the species. It belonged to babies, to mothers, to survival. She licked again, and again, and again. Then she turned, walked back to the calf, and lowered her head to his tiny mouth. The calf latched onto her muzzle, suckling gently from the milk she held. Shadow returned to the bowl, licked, returned to him, let him drink. Back to the bowl, back to him. Over and over. A relay of nourishment that no textbook, no expert, no scientist had ever described. Jonas let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd holding. By God, she's feeding him! Emily wiped her eyes. She's teaching herself how to be his mother. Noah grinned, whispering to his drone, "I can't believe what I'm filming." Down in the valley, Shadow continued her impossible ritual. Each trip slower than the last, her exhaustion visible, but her determination even stronger. The calf's trembling eased, his breathing steadied, his eyes opened wider, brighter. Shadow watched him with a focus that was no longer that of a starving predator. It was the gaze of a mother fighting for her child. The moon shone on them, Panther and antelope, two creatures never meant to share warmth, now bound by hunger, fate, and something far deeper than instinct. Emily whispered into the night, her voice breaking with emotion. If anyone ever doubts that love exists in the wild, show them this. Tonight, a predator broke every law she'd ever known, and in doing so, she kept two hearts beating.
For the first time since the storm, the valley felt alive again. Sunlight streamed over the rocks in soft golden ribbons, warming the wet moss and stirring the scents of earth and leaf. Birds chattered overhead, testing their voices after a long night. Even the air felt different, gentler, as though the forest itself had paused to witness something it did not entirely understand. Shadow lay curled beside the calf, her dark body forming a crescent of shelter around him. The night's feeding had kept him alive, barely, but alive was enough. When the first rays of dawn brushed the clearing, the calf wobbled to his feet, blinking and sniffing at the green shoots that pushed through cracks in the stone. He took a few uncertain steps. Then, with the awkward enthusiasm of a creature just beginning to understand his legs, he bounced, a tiny hop that startled even himself. Shadow lifted her head, her amber eyes watching him with a softness rarely seen in a predator. He stumbled again, but this time she nudged him gently back to balance. It was the same gesture she once used on her own cubs, an instinct she had buried beneath years of solitary survival, but which had risen again the moment this helpless newborn pressed against her. Emily watched from the ridge above, binoculars raised, breath caught tight in her chest. Jonas stood beside her with arms folded, scanning the forest edges for danger, while Noah hovered near the drone case, whispering excitedly into his recorder. Emily lowered her binoculars, her voice hushed. "He's stronger today. Look at him, Jonas. He's actually playing." Jonas nodded. "And she's letting him. That's the part I still can't understand." But the valley's serenity hid a tension that none of them missed. Because peace in Ngala was never permanent. It was a thin thread stretched tight between storms.
and danger was approaching from two directions. Shadow sensed it first. Her ears twitched, her muscles tightened, her gaze snapped toward the far ridge, nostrils flaring. The calf froze mid-step, then instinctively pressed his body against her leg. Emily felt the shift in the air too. She smells something. Jonas lifted the binoculars and scanned the ridgeline. Something big. "What do you see?" Emily whispered. The binoculars lowered slightly. Jonas's jaw tightened. A male. Emily's chest constricted. "A leopard?" "No," Jonas said quietly. "Another panther." A shape materialized from the tree line, broad-shouldered, sleek, and darker even than Shadow. A black panther, larger than her by at least a fifth of her weight. His movements were bold, confident, predatory. Rays. Emily had only seen him once on camera footage, a dominant male with a reputation that frightened even the rangers. Rays did not tolerate rivals, he did not share territory, and he certainly did not ignore opportunities for an easy kill. Shadow rose silently, her body forming a living wall between Rays and the calf. She did not snarl, not yet. She only stared, making her claim with her stance alone. Rays descended the slope with the easy grace of one who had never lost a fight. He paused halfway down, his gaze sliding past Shadow to the calf sheltered behind him. His nostrils flared, reading the scene instantly. Prey, weak, alone. His tail flicked once, twice, an unmistakable signal. He intended to take the calf, and possibly the valley. Emily's pulse soared. "Oh no, she can't fight him. She's too weak." Jonas's voice was low, grim. "A starving mother always fights." Rays stepped closer. Shadow stepped forward to match him, her hackles rising. The calf pressed against her leg, trembling. Then, Rays let out a low growl, a deep, rumbling threat that rolled through the valley like distant thunder. Shadow answered with a sound Emily had never heard from her before, a guttural, vibrating snarl that came not from hunger, but from something far more ancient, a mother's warning. Rays lunged first. Shadow met him mid-air. Their bodies collided with a force that shook loose dust from the rocks. Claws slashed, teeth snapped. The valley erupted into violence, fast, brutal, primal. Rays used his weight to shove Shadow sideways, trying to reach the calf. Shadow twisted beneath him, raking his side, forcing him back, but her strength was fading quickly. Hunger dulled her reflexes, and a single misstep could cost her everything. The calf cried out, shrill, terrified. Rays turned toward the sound. Shadow threw herself at him, her body slamming into his flank. She pinned him just long enough to drive him backward. But Rays was stronger. With a violent jerk, he flung her off and lunged again, jaws open. Emily gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. "Jonas, we have to do something." Jonas grabbed her arm. Interfering now could get her killed, or him, or us. But if we don't... A sudden metallic snap cut through the clearing. Then a hiss. Then a sharp, vicious twang. Rays froze. Shadow froze. Emily stiffened. Jonas whispered, "That sounded like a snare," Emily breathed. The fight had kicked up dirt and debris, revealing a new set of traps Moose's men had planted at the edge of the valley. Rays had triggered one with his back leg. The metal wire tightened, slicing into flesh. He yowled in pain, thrashing violently. Shadow, panting, blood streaking her flank, lowered her head. Even injured, Rays tried to advance again, pure instinct, but the wire snapped taut, dragging him backward. The calf whimpered behind her, pressing into Shadow's hind leg. Rays let out one more furious, frustrated roar before retreating into the trees, dragging the snare with him, his pride wounded as badly as his leg. Shadow stood trembling,
her breathing ragged, her sides heaving. She licked her shoulder where blood trickled down. Then, slowly, she turned to the calf, not to the direction Ray's had fled. Her priority had never wavered. The calf leaned into her, as if to confirm she still lived. Shadow touched her forehead to him in a gesture so tender it silenced the entire valley. Emily exhaled shakily. He could have killed her. Or the baby, or both? Jonas nodded. But he didn't, because she fought like a mother. Emily's gaze drifted to the place where the snare lay half buried, disturbed by the fight. And someone else meant them harm. Noah adjusted his drone, zooming in on the damage. Those traps weren't here yesterday. Someone's getting close. Emily swallowed hard. The valley had become a battleground between hunger and hope, predator and instinct, humans and the wild. And tomorrow, it would bring a new challenge neither Shadow nor the calf was ready for. But for now, in the fragile calm that followed violence, Shadow nudged the calf toward the shade and lay beside him, wounded but resolute. She had fought for him. She would do it again, because a bond that shouldn't have existed was now the strongest thread holding both their lives together.
The storm had washed the valley clean, but the scent of danger lingered like a bruise on the air. Even as the sun rose high over Ngala, warming the mossy stones and coaxing insects back into their daily hum, the forest felt tense, watchful, the kind of stillness that came before something broke. Shadow lay near the spring, her body curved protectively around the calf, whose legs were finally gaining strength. He moved with a new confidence now, sniffing at leaves, testing little hops that seemed to surprise even him. But anyone watching closely could see the truth beneath the optimism. He was still too thin, his limbs too delicate, his energy rising and falling like a weak flame in a breeze. Shadow's own wounds from the battle with Rays had begun to stiffen. A long claw mark across her shoulder burned with every movement, and bruises throbbed along her ribs. Hunger gnawed at her more fiercely now. Fighting had drained what little she had left. Yet, every time she eyed the deeper forest, where prey might still hide, she looked back at the calf and stayed. Instinct should have driven her to hunt. Love anchored her in place. High on the ridge, Emily watched through binoculars, her stomach tightening with each uneven rise of Shadow's chest. Jonas crouched nearby, scanning the perimeter for signs of predators or, worse, poachers. Noah adjusted the drone antenna, chewing on the edge of his sleeve in concentration. "She's hurt worse than we thought," Emily whispered. Jonas nodded. "She's putting everything into protecting him. It's draining her faster than the hunger." Emily lowered her binoculars, rubbing her forehead. "If she doesn't hunt soon..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Below, the calf, still nameless, still impossibly vulnerable, wandered toward a patch of soft grass. His movements were clumsy but curious, his small hooves slipping occasionally on the wet ground. Shadow rose to follow him, wincing as her shoulders stretched. She nudged him gently away from the slippery locks, her tail brushing his flank to steady him. For a moment, the valley looked almost peaceful, almost safe. Then Shadow's ears twitched. Her head lifted sharply, her muscles tensed with a sudden, urgent fear. Jonas saw it at the same instant. "Something's coming." Emily scanned the opposite ridge. "What is it? Another predator?" "No," Jonas said quietly. "Look at the trees. Too still." It wasn't an animal. It was silence, unnatural, heavy, pressing inward like a closing fist. The calf bleated softly. Shadow stepped in front of him. Then, a faint crunch. A twig breaking. Soft, deliberate. Human. Emily's heartbeat stuttered. "Moose's men!" Jonas didn't deny it. "They're circling the valley." Shadow smelled them next. Her head snapped toward the sound. The fur along her spine rose like a dark wave. Her tail rigid, she guided the calf backward until he was nearly pressed against the rock wall. Another step, another crunch. They were getting closer. Emily whispered, "Jonas, we have to warn her. We have to." But it was already too late. A rustle to the right. A shadowed figure stepped from the trees. Tall, armed, moving lightly despite the weight of the rifle strapped across his chest. Moose's men didn't come this deep unless they smelled opportunity or wanted to hide something. And the bait of a bushbuck carcass earlier proved exactly the kind of cruelty they favored. Shadow growled low, a deep rumble that vibrated through the valley floor. The calf trembled, pressing against her leg. The man paused, scanning the clearing with narrow, predatory eyes. He didn't see Emily or Jonas on the ridge, but he saw Shadow and the calf. A slow grin spread across his face, because he knew what no outsider should ever discover. A predator protecting prey meant profit. The calf could be sold, the panther's pelt even more so. Shadow stepped forward, placing her body fully between him and the calf. Her lips peeled back in a snarl so sharp it glinted in the sun. The man raised his rifle, not to fire, but to aim, to threaten, to weigh his chances. Emily sucked in a breath so heartily it hurt. Jonas grabbed her arm, stopping her from moving. "If you make a sound, he'll shoot her." Noah froze over the drone controller, terrified to move it even an inch. Shadow took a deliberate step forward. The man adjusted his stance, readying himself for her charge or for his shot. Then, something unexpected happened. The calf stumbled sideways, straight toward a patch of leaves that shifted too easily. Emily saw it. Jonas saw it. Even Noah's gasp was audible. A snare. Camouflaged, buried beneath damp foliage. "Shadow!" Emily cried before she could stop herself. The man snapped its head toward the ridge just long enough. Shadow leapt. Not at the man, but at the ground in front of the calf. Her paws hit the earth just as the hidden wire snapped upward, tightening around the air inches from his tender legs. With a powerful swipe, she slammed her weight down on the mechanism. It whirred, twisted, then snapped uselessly aside. The man cursed, raising his rifle again, but Shadow was already in motion. She drove him back with a roar that shook the valley walls. He stumbled, dropped his aim, then turned and fled into the greenery, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. Emily collapsed to her knees, trembling. She saved him again. Jonas exhaled deeply, and she saved herself, barely. Below them, Shadow stood panting, her wounded shoulder bleeding anew from the effort. She nudged the calf, making sure he was unharmed. Then, exhausted, she lowered herself and curled protectively around him. The calf curled into her warmth, unaware that death had stood only feet away. Emily wiped her eyes. "Jonas, if they're setting traps here, they're coming back." Jonas nodded once. Yes, and soon. Emily looked down at the injured panther who refused to abandon the child she should have killed. A mother bound by a choice that defied nature. A calf living on borrowed miracles. "We can't let the valley become another killing ground," she whispered. Because now she understood. Shadow could fight predators. She could fight hunger. She could even fight the forest itself. But she couldn't fight humans alone. And the next time Moose's men returned, they wouldn't come quietly or alone.
The rains returned in small, hesitant bursts. Soft showers that slipped through the canopy and coaxed shy green shoots out of the battered earth. Ngala was still wounded, still thin and brittle, but here and there the forest began to remember what it meant to grow. In the hidden valley, the change was even more visible. The spring ran a little stronger.
Moss thickened along the rock walls, tender grass pushed up in scattered patches, bright and stubborn. And the calf, the tiny, trembling life that should have died days ago, had begun to look less like a shadow and more like a promise. He could stand longer now, walk farther. Sometimes he even sprang into awkward, joyful hops that made his legs splay out before he caught himself again. Shadow watched every movement with tired but patient eyes. Her wounds had scabbed over, stiff and sore, but no longer bleeding. Hunger was still with her, a constant ache in her belly, but she had learned to live with it the way she had learned to live with grief, by holding something else closer. The calf nuzzled her shoulder, then wandered toward the sunlit edge of the valley, nose twitching with new smells. Shadow followed as she always did, her body drifting a few steps behind him, never quite relaxed. He stopped suddenly. His ears lifted. His whole body seemed to lean toward a sound only he could hear. Shadow froze. From beyond the ridge came a murmur of movement, hooves on soft soil, a ripple of bodies brushing through leaves, the gentle snorts and soft calls of a herd on the move. Antelope. Many of them. The calf's breathing changed. He stood taller, his tiny crest of hair along his spine bristling with something like recognition. His gaze locked on the gap between trees at the far side of the valley, where the sound grew louder. Then they appeared. One by one, through the dappled light, a herd of bushbuck stepped into view. Adults, youngsters, a few older calves. Their heads bobbed as they walked, ears flicking, muscles taut with the alert, nervous grace of prey animals that had survived both drought and hunters. The calf took an eager step forward. Shadow moved in front of him, out of habit more than thought, but this time he did not press into her side. Instead, he peered around her leg, eyes wide, nostrils flaring as he drank in the scent that spoke to something deep in his bones. Family. Even if not by face, then by kind. High on the ridge, Emily saw it all unfold through her binoculars. Her heart clenched. "Jonas, the herd's here." Jonas lifted his own binoculars. They must have followed the new grass, or the water. Beside them, Noah adjusted the drone for a better angle. Look at the little one. He knows them, or they feel familiar to him. Down below, one of the adult females lifted her head, ears pricked. A faint scar curved along the side of her neck, pale against her fur, as if a snare had once tasted her but failed to keep her. She stared toward the valley, nostrils testing the air. She did not bolt when she saw Shadow. She watched, measured. Then, astonishingly, she stepped a little closer. The herd behind her hesitated, but did not flee. Hunger was stronger than fear today. The valley's sparse but precious greenery called to them, and they could not afford to ignore an oasis, even one guarded by a predator. The calf bleated, a soft, high sound that cut through the space between them. Several heads turned immediately. Eyes widened. Feet shifted. Something in the sound was undeniably theirs. Shadow felt the calf lean forward again, muscles quivering with a longing she could feel even if she couldn't understand. He took one hesitant step away from her, then another. Her chest tightened. At the same time, miles away at the field station, Dr. Asha Patel stared at the latest footage on her monitor. The images, transmitted from Noah's drone, showed everything. Shadow nursing the calf with stolen milk, fighting rays, outsmarting snares, and now standing between the calf and a full herd of his own kind. Patel exhaled slowly. This can't go on. In the doorway, a visiting coordinator from the funding agency folded his arms. If the media gets hold of this without context, they'll accuse us of tampering, hand-feeding predators, turning this into a zoo.
Patel nodded grimly. I know. Then fix it. Reinforce the protocols, remove the calf, document it properly. But this arrangement between Panther and prey, it ends. We don't manage wild families, we protect populations. It was not a suggestion. Minutes later, back in the truck bumping toward the ridge, Emily's hands gripped her tranquilizer rifle so tightly her knuckles ached. Jonas drove in silence, jaw clenched. "You're sure about this?" he asked at last. "No," Emily answered honestly. "But they are." She didn't have to say who they were. The donors, the board, the ones who never felt the heat of Ngala on their skin but held its fate in their signatures. The calf is a victim of poaching. By their rules, he qualifies for rescue, a rehab center, maybe even a release one day. And Shadow? Emily swallowed. Shadow goes back to being what she was before all this. Just another predator we watch from a distance. The words tasted like ash. Back in the valley, the herd began to graze cautiously at the edges, always keeping one eye on Shadow. The scarred female moved a little closer to the calf, nose lifting, testing the air. The calf looked from her to Shadow and back again. Two worlds. Two mothers. One wild, one impossible. On the ridge above, Emily and Jonas slipped out of the truck and moved into position. Emily raised her rifle, its barrel trained not on the calf, but on the ground beside Shadow, ready to fire a warning shot, to startle, to create distance if she had to. Her heart hammered so loudly she could hear it in her ears. "Once we take him," Jonas said softly, "there's no undoing it." "I know," Emily whispered. Shadow turned her head slightly, catching their scent on the wind. She saw the glint of metal, the set of Emily's shoulders, the way Jonas looked not at her, but at the calf. She understood enough. Between the herd calling softly ahead and the humans watching sternly from above, Shadow suddenly stood at the center of a circle tightening around the one thing she had left. The calf pressed against her leg once more, as if asking, "What now?" Shadow lowered her head, eyes flicking from the herd to Emily, to the valley that had become their refuge and their trap. She did not know the words for what she was facing. But if she could have, she might have called it what it truly was. An impossible choice, and she would have to make it soon. The valley held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause between the trees, as though the entire forest understood that something sacred, something irreversible, was about to happen. The herd waited at the far end of the clearing, shifting uneasily but not leaving. Emily and Jonas watched from the ridge, hands trembling, neither quite ready to do what the conservation board demanded. And in the center of it all stood Shadow, wounded, starving, but unbroken. The calf pressed against her leg again, his tiny body rising and falling with anxious breaths. He didn't know why the world felt tense, or why his new mother had gone so still. He didn't understand the herd's call echoing softly through the trees, or the humans hovering above with tools meant to separate, not save. But Shadow understood every piece of it. Her gaze moved from the herd to the humans, then back to the calf. Her tail twitched, not in irritation, but in something closer to despair. She had fought predators, storms, snares, and hunger. She had defied instinct, biology, and the expectations of her own species. But this was a battle the wild could not teach her how to win. The calf let out a soft bleat. Shadow lowered her head and touched her nose to his. He relaxed instantly, trusting her completely. Emily felt her throat tighten. "Jonas, I can't trank her. Jonas shook his head. "You shouldn't. This isn't ours to end." "But the board isn't here," Jonas said firmly. "And they haven't watched this the way we have." Before Emily could respond, the scarred female bushbuck stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Her ears swiveled toward the calf, then toward Shadow. She didn't charge, she didn't flee. She simply waited, an invitation as old as survival itself. Shadow's muscles tensed. She looked at the female, at the herd behind her, then at the calf whose future she carried like a weight in her chest. The calf let out a soft bleat. Shadow lowered her head and touched her nose to his. He relaxed instantly, trusting her completely. Emily felt her throat tighten. "Jonas, I can't trank her. Jonas shook his head. "You shouldn't. This isn't ours to end." "But the board isn't here," Jonas said firmly. "And they haven't watched this the way we have." Before Emily could respond, the scarred female bushbuck stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Her ears swiveled toward the calf, then toward Shadow. She didn't charge, she didn't flee. She simply waited, an invitation as old as survival itself. Shadow's muscles tensed. She looked at the female, at the herd behind her, then at the calf whose future she carried like a weight in her chest. The calf let out a soft bleat. Shadow lowered her head and touched her nose to his. He relaxed instantly, trusting her completely. Emily felt her throat tighten. "Jonas, I can't trank her. Jonas shook his head. "You shouldn't. This isn't ours to end." "But the board felt isn't here," Jonas said firmly. "And they haven't watched this the way we have." Before Emily could respond, the scarred female bushbuck stepped forward one more time. It paused, then looked at Shadow, inviting her to release the calf into the herd. Shadow's muscles tensed. She looked at the calf, who had taken a small, uncertain step toward the herd. Her eyes softened, and she let out a low, rumbling, purr-like hum, the same sound she used to soothe him on stormy nights. The calf pressed his head toward her chest, lingering, as if memorizing her scent. Then Shadow did something Emily would never forget. She nudged him, gently, firmly, toward the herd. The calf hesitated, took one step, then another. Shadow watched, every muscle quivering as though each step was carved out of her own flesh. When he reached the nearest doe, she lowered her head and sniffed him cautiously. The calf leaned against her, uncertain at first, but settling, the way he had settled into Shadow's side only nights before. The herd accepted him, just like that. Shadow sagged slightly, the tension leaving her in a single, breathless exhale. The calf turned one more time. His gaze found hers across the clearing. Not afraid, not confused, just remembering. Emily wiped her eyes. "He's saying goodbye." "No," Jonas said softly. "He's saying thank you." Shadow held his gaze for a long, aching moment. Then she dipped her head, just once. A gesture of release, of love stronger than instinct. The scarred female bushbuck guided the calf into the center of the herd, and with a few soft snorts, the group turned and began their slow, cautious walk back toward the deeper forest where new grass had started to grow. The calf looked back only once, then disappeared among bodies that shared his scent and his future. Shadow stood alone in the space he had left. For several long seconds, she didn't move. Emily's heart cracked. She lifted the tranquilizer rifle again, this time not to fire, but to lower it gently to the ground. Jonas placed a hand on her shoulder. Let her have her moment. Shadow finally turned away from the path of the herd. Her steps were slow, her head low. Not defeated, but emptied. She walked to the rock wall that bordered the valley, paused, and glanced up toward the ridge where Emily and Jonas stood. Emily froze. In all her years, she had never seen a panther deliberately acknowledge a human like this. Shadow blinked once, not in fear, not in warning, almost in understanding. Then she slipped into the trees like a ghost, dissolving into mist. Silent, alone, but alive. Emily stood motionless, the rifle hanging useless in her hand. Do you think she knows we were trying to help? Jonas shook his head slowly. No, but she knew we could hurt her, and she stayed anyway. That's trust, Noah whispered, even if she didn't mean it to be. Emily exhaled, her voice thick. Where do you think she'll go now? Jonas looked toward the dense part of the forest, Shadow's territory, the place she had always returned to before hunger, storms, and impossible choices had changed her life. She'll hunt, heal, start again. Emily nodded. And the calf? Jonas smiled softly. He's with his people now, and he'll be stronger because of her. Far in the distance, the herd moved like a ripple of brown and white through the trees. The calf bounced at their center, awkward, joyful, alive. Emily wiped her eyes again, then glanced back toward the quieter side of the valley, where Shadow had vanished. It's strange, she said softly. She saved him, and he saved her too. Because for the first time since losing her cubs, Shadow had loved something again. And she had chosen that love over her own loneliness, over hunger, and over even the death that stalked her at every corner. It wasn't a human kind of motherhood. It wasn't a natural one either. It was something rarer, born in the space between instinct and miracle. Ngala would remember it. Emily would document it. Jonas would tell the story to every ranger who came after him. And the calf, grown strong in the seasons ahead, would carry its echo in every bold leap he took. Shadow, somewhere deep in the forest, would feel the ache of that absence for many nights to come. But when she lifted her head toward the moon and breathed in the cool night air, she would know she had done what no predator before her had done. She had chosen life for something that was never meant to survive. And that choice, impossible, unthinkable, unnatural, had changed everything.